We are actually going to come on to the biggest story in the UK today, but not for the reasons that everyone else is reacting to it, which is the Trump story and the Afghan NATO comments. So obviously, he's angered everyone again after his comments that he was made about NATO not really kind of like pulling its weight and all of this. Like, I don't want to be the person who is just gonna, blindly just be like, defend veterans no matter what, defend soldiers no matter what. Like, I think the majority of people now agree, and I think polling has proved this as well multiple times. We should never have gone to the Middle East. I did look at some polling earlier about what happened after 9/11 in terms of how many people agreed with, like, we should do something, we should intervene, we should go over there essentially to the Middle East. It was 83%, the first Ipsos poll, which is wild when you think about it. But at the same time, understandable in terms of like the immediate main reaction, right? This was a poll that was done weeks after 9/11, and this is UK, just to clarify. But what was interesting about the Ipsos poll is that they've changed the article from the date it was published to update it over time, and you can see that like literally 1 week after, 2 weeks after, 3 weeks after, it just the approval for going into the Middle East was just dropping within weeks after the original poll was made. And within like 2 months after it happening, it was like 60% of the country who wanted to go there. But the reason I'm bringing obviously that side up, we'll come to the Trump clip in a second, because when we get into these conversations about Middle East, NATO, them invoking Article 5 and being the only country to do it, and all the NATO countries basically got involved. It was over 1,000 NATO troops that died in the period of the war against terror. So it's not just Afghanistan, it was the entire region where we went to, everything from Iraq and including areas obviously like Syria, which ended up getting caught up in it later on. And we all know what's unfolded in the Middle East over the last 20 years. But I just want to talk about the loss of life over there, as opposed to just the soldiers from our own country, which do deserve to be talked about, and they will be talked about in a second. But according to the Watson School of International and Public Affairs at Brown University, an estimated 940,000 people were killed by direct post-9/11 war violence in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and Pakistan between 2001 and 2023. Of these, more than 432 were civilians. I'd question that, because I don't trust our governments to label who civilians are and who terrorists are. The number of people wounded or ill as a result of the conflicts is far higher, as is the number of civilians who died indirectly as a result of wars, destruction of economies, healthcare systems, infrastructure, and the environment. An estimated 3.6 to 3.8 million people died indirectly in post-9/11 war zones, bringing the total death toll to at least 4.5 to 4.7 million and counting. I think it's always important to bring that up when we're talking about this topic, because when people are invoking these numbers about like how many soldiers died, it is important. It definitely is, right? I don't, some soldiers over there, we know they've been investigated, and some of them have escaped justice, and some of them have actually got justice for doing bad things over there as individuals. But I don't hold like individual soldiers accountable for the government's actions to send them over there. And it was 457 soldiers, I think, who died from the UK, over 1,000 in total from NATO. So I don't think there's ever point wasting air disparaging those deaths, when, despite the fact that people agree that we shouldn't have gone there, we still went there. People died, and Article 5 has only ever been invoked once through NATO. And this goes back to what JD Vance was saying last year at the German something conference. Maybe Demo will remember the name of it when he comes in a second, where he was basically saying, we haven't fought a war in 40 years. We don't like war. We don't want war. We shouldn't be celebrating war. We shouldn't just immediately defend these actions. But it is still awful for Trump to be making these comments. So let's quickly just go to the comments quickly that Trump made and just play the clip.
We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. They'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that, and they stayed a little off the front lines. But we've been very good to Europe and to many other countries. And now under my administration, that began because we had a very successful first term. That began then, but it has to be a two-way street.
We do have more responses, just for the producer in the background. Let's skip Kemi, but we are going to come on to Starmer's response to what Trump said. Let's go to that one first.
What is your response to the interview that the president gave talking about the British contribution in Afghanistan?
Let me start by paying tribute to the 457 of our armed services who lost their lives in Afghanistan. I will never forget their courage, their bravery, and the sacrifice that they made for their country. There are many also who are injured, some with life-changing injuries. And so I consider President Trump's remarks to be insulting and frankly appalling. And I'm not surprised they've caused such hurt to the loved ones of those who were killed or injured, and in fact, across the country.
As well as politicians expressing a view, a lot of the relatives, some bereaved, others whose sons in particular suffered dreadful injuries. One is Diane Durney, mother of a man called Ben Parkinson, dreadful injuries. She has said that you need to be tougher with President Trump and demand an apology from him. Will you call for an apology from the president?
Well, I've made my position clear, and what I say to Diane is if I had misspoken in that way or said those words, I would certainly apologise, and I'd apologise to her.
Yeah.
This is becoming a bit of a habit now. You're having to distance yourself and criticise the president. It's about third or fourth time in this week. Are you getting a bit exasperated by some of the things President Trump says?
We have a very close relationship with the US, and that is important for our security, for our defence and our intelligence, and it's very important we maintain that relationship. But it is because of that relationship that we fought alongside the Americans for our values in Afghanistan. And it was in that context that people lost their lives or suffered terrible injuries, fighting for freedom, fighting with our allies for what we believe in.
What do people think of that response? We'll quickly come to Farage's response first. We're going to skip Kemi's, but Farage weighed in. He's trying to do the whole distance himself thing, which I'll come to in a second. But let's just see what Farage said.
But there was one thing that he did say that I have to take issue with. He said, NATO have never given us anything back. And I will object to that politely by saying this. When the decision was made to go into Afghanistan, we went in with America and a coalition of the willing. We stayed by America for the whole 20 years. We proportionately spent the same money as America. We lost the same number of lives as America, pro rata. And the same applies actually to Denmark and other countries too. So it's not quite fair.
Right. So we're going to come to Damo in a second, talking about the effect of politics in the UK, maybe around the world, of Trump. But there was a really good comment that I saw in response to Starmer, not in here, but just yesterday, where people were commenting on these videos about Starmer saying, oh, he's finally found his spine. And somebody responded saying, it scrolled up. People are saying Starmer has found his spine, or as one person I saw in the comment section saying, perhaps a vertebrae, but not a spine, because again, it's not strong enough, is it? Like, what is happening right now is not strong enough. And the response, I get it. Like, in an ideal world, people will want to say, like, let's just immediately cut off all ties, close the bases, let's, close his golf course, do all of these things, right? But again, we'd like that, but we know it's not going to happen, and we know that they have to be measured. But in terms of the measurement itself of the response, like people want more, and it ties back to, I think, the history, which maybe I can discuss with Damo as well. Is if you actually look back at how we kind of fought against the BUF, the British Union of Fascists, in the 1930s, a big part of the fight, and historians agree that the key to kind of like defeating them was by saying, look what else is happening over there, like Germany, Italy, and other countries. Look what is happening. Do you want that here? And they've not been willing to do that. They haven't been willing to look what's happening in the US, where everybody's seeing the story of the 5-year-old getting arrested and used as bait to catch other immigrants in the US by knocking on doors. Everything from obviously Rene Good to the hundreds and hundreds of stories. Like, they're deporting people without releasing their names and snatching them up on the street. They're threatening to annex Greenland. What they've done in Venezuela. They're probably going to attack Iran, I would say. My guess is in the next few days. All of what they are doing, suppressing law firms, going after people in the media. Multiple journalists have been arrested, going after political enemies. These are the types of things that we should be screaming at our, from our lungs, at the top of our voice, to be able to defeat the hard right and the far right in this country that's rising, and the extreme right. You wouldn't believe the amount of people that I come across now who say, somebody said this to me yesterday, Tommy is a liberal. Tommy Robinson is a liberal. Like, this is how far the Overton window is moving in the UK. And they haven't been willing to scream, look what is happening in America. Do you want that here? Now they're starting to criticize Trump a little bit, going a little bit further, especially when he's going after, veterans and people who've died and fighting for the country. But it's not enough. And I feel like the only way to defeat what is happening right now is to really, really, turn it up. Demo. I didn't want to do a video about like the typical like outrage response. Plenty of people have made these videos and comments, but I just want to talk about like US UK relationship future, the anti-Trump effect. Australia, people say Albanese won because of the anti-Trump effect. Same with Mark Carney in Canada. And, I'm sure you might have seen some of these articles floating around Europe that, the AFD and Marianne Le Pen's party, whose name of the party eludes me, are saying we don't want Trump's endorsement. We don't want it because he's bad for them. So what do you think of it all? What do you make of it all?
Well, in Le Pen's case, she's got enough baggage as it is without adding even more fascism to it, to be honest, isn't she? What can I say that might be polite? I wish Donald Trump would shove his bone spurs up his ass, if that's what he's going to say about military veterans, people who've given their lives in war zones they never asked to be in. Frankly, there's another strong argument for saying they never should have been there, but as per usual, the UK has gone after the US, no matter what they say or do, because that's the special relationship, isn't it, folks? They say jump and we go how high and how many lives do you want us to put on the line? Because that's what modern history has been about here, isn't it? Keir Starmer in that clip, though, was absolutely flaming hilarious, wasn't he? I wouldn't even go so far as to say he's given him a vertebrae. And the bit that struck me most there, Lewis, you've got a good memory for politics and these things. You've got a better one than me, I would say. Can you remember when Keir Starmer has ever apologised for anything himself, ever?
Not in person. He I think Downing Street issued a comment about his regret for the Enoch Powell-ish like speech, but he didn't apologize himself.
He's never gone on camera and said sorry to anybody about anything. So for him to allude that Donald Trump should say it was a bit too rich. I'm glad he restrained himself to the point that I know I'm not going to go and say to Donald Trump, please say sorry, because that's kind of what it would be like, isn't it? And I'm not sure that Donald would be able to hear him muffled as he would be when Starmer is toes deep in his flaming backside. That's the special relationship again, isn't it? It's horrible, and I think it's exemplified most of all, not even with Afghanistan, but the other example you brought up was regards to the US and the UK and the relationship. And ICE really does sum this up now, because if you want to take the lessons of the past and how we dealt with the British Union of fascists and what eventually came to pass in Germany and what was identified and that kind of thing, and then you look at ICE and what they've done with Renee Good, with this 5-year-old kid that they used for bait to catch, and that got offended again. JD Vance was out there again, wasn't he, defending that movement. Is this not fascism? Is this not what we all say our fathers and our grandfathers fought and died to stop? And you've got apologists in this country for that conduct. I mean, a lot of people are comparing, I suppose it's a very easy thing to do, I suppose, in a flippant sort of way, is compare what Trump is administering over in the States with regards to ICE to what Hitler did. And I saw a clip of Jon Stewart the other day, and he does these warm-up bits before he does his show, The Daily Show. And the audience was saying, what do you think about the comparisons to Trump and Hitler? And he made a very salient point that Hitler was popular when he was doing it. Trump isn't even that. And the midterms later on this year, if he doesn't manage to stop them, are going to prove that beyond doubt, I'm sure. It's frightening what we're seeing not only happen in the States, but what is getting defended. And then you go ahead and you see our politicians and Farage as well sat on a stage in Davos, because of course that's where he would be, because that's where he's happiest. That's the sort of people he'd like to represent if he ever came to lead this country. And I'm sure we would end up with something similar, our own version of ICE in this country, if we haven't already got it with how our police often are operating, well, especially the Met in terms of protest and Palestine action and that kind of thing as well. The comparisons are all there to greater or lesser extents, but it's unavoidable now, I think, for people to not draw the comparisons in their own heads that this is where we're heading.
So I don't know if you saw this photo the other day. I'm getting it up on my iPad, very unprofessional,
Yeah,
of a guy called a guy called Greg Bavino. He's like a senior border
yeah, I did a
official.
piece on him. Yeah, he's head of border force.
If anybody didn't see this, just what does this invoke to you immediately when you see this? Oh, it's not going to focus, is it? It's not going to focus. You can kind of see it there. What does that invoke to you? I've tested this on a few people who are not politically engaged, and now my camera's gone all yellow. How about that? Oh, it's adjusting. There we go. That as soon as I saw that, it immediately invoked like Nazi code, right? As soon as everybody saw this, he has been seen doing salutes. His rhetoric is very Nazi-like. He's a U.S. official, senior. I showed this to a few people who are not politically engaged, and I just said, like, no context. What does this invoke to you? And everybody was immediately like Nazi code. And like some of them are just, it's not even signal anymore. It's not even subtle. It's straight up, we all know about Stephen Miller. And it just, again, feels like to me that people need to be telling a stronger story. But obviously the Starmer government, and, I don't envy them at all, their position. Right now, what we need is for them to be, calling out what is happening over there and what's spreading around the world. But I'm not saying they can't, but they won't because of the power that Trump holds over us, which then goes on to the question of like, we need to decouple and we need to move away from this relationship. And when Trump first came in and he was threatening, the whole trade war with China, I think about 15% of their economy at the time was reliant on the US. And they said, we can't have that. We're not allowing this power over us. We're not allowing it. And by the time he came back in, it was 5%. I think that's kind of what we need in a sense. Like we need to not ever be this exposed to any power who's this powerful in any way that they can have such military and economic power over us that we're literally not willing to call out like children being snatched off the streets, of people being disappeared, multiple people turning up dead at detention centers. And obviously, objectively worse than those individual cases, the annexation of Greenland, which could lead to the oppression of those people who don't want that, the extraction of those resources, the environmental damage, causing damage for generations, potential displacement of people through the annexation. Who knows what the effects are going to be from the intervention in Venezuela decades down the line? They're already one of the top three refugee applications to the EU, Venezuelans. I think it's Syrians. I'd say they're Afghan, Syrian, and Venezuelan. They're the top three. And we're going to be paying for years for this. And who knows what's going to come next? Maybe Trump is a liberal compared to who's going to be the president in 2 presidents' time and the power that they have over us. So if I were Europe, if I were these powers, if I were all these other countries, I'd be doing what China did as soon as they got threatened by Trump, which is slowly but surely securing themselves away from this power that can be essentially used over us for whatever they want.
It's a terrifying thought that Trump might be the nice version of whatever comes next, isn't it? I think China had the right idea because China diversified. China said, "Well, if I'm not going to trade with you, I'll take the hit. You're not going to have this power over me. Then I'll deal more with Russia, or I'll deal more with Iran. I mean, there's Iranian oil that they get for their industry most of the time anyway." Obviously, the Greenland thing is farcical in that Donald Trump doesn't necessarily know from 1 minute to the next whether it's Greenland or Iceland or Norway that he actually wants. Maybe he just draws a big red circle around the top of the world and says, "I want that bit." Maybe that's how they have to. Color in and draw a picture for him just to try and get him to understand it. Venezuela is becoming an even bigger mess. Apparently, the UAE now wants in to take their gas. So, because of course they do, because the UAE are not awful people at all in the slightest. It just goes on and on and on and on and on, doesn't it? I mean, we do need to decouple. To bring it back to the UK, we do need to decouple. Our foreign policy has basically been dictated to us since the end of the Suez Crisis. Everything has been what America says we do, and that has just carried on. And you look at our independent nuclear deterrent as a clear and obvious example of that. There's nothing independent about it. It relies on US codes. The warheads themselves belong to the US. We just have the delivery system, and yet we get to pay billions and billions and billions out of our pockets to have this thing that we don't really have at all in a practical sense. Not that it's a practical, thing to think about ever using them anyway. But yeah, you take all the military bases up and down the country as well that I know Polanski, if I bring him up again, has said about getting rid of. And but that's the sort of messaging you want from a leader, isn't it? A leader taking a lead, a leader rebuffing, a leader saying, no, we don't need the US anymore. But we've become so reliant on the US for all these decades since the 1950s. And of course, you've had Farage come out saying boo hiss at Europe, which has cut us off even more. That's really the way we should be looking to diversify ourselves in the same sense that China has. There are other markets around the world. We don't have to deal with the US just because they're across a convenient piece of water called the Atlantic Ocean. I get the geography might be favorable, but Europe's more favorable. It's closer. Africa isn't that far away either. And if something ever gets done about Israel, perhaps a proper route to the Middle East might exist as well. Although you still have other routes through Turkey or what have you that you could access, or even Gaza if you or the Palestinian territories as a whole if you chose to go down that line. But of course, that's not going to happen anytime soon under this sort of government.
No. Everything's a mess. I was just quickly because it was in the scratching in the back of my mind, just like because there's so many stories that never has not made it out of the US. Because obviously you get the big ones, you get the young boy, you get Rene Good. This one is the one that kind of frightened me, the most in a way. This happened July. An 82-year-old man in Pennsylvania was secretly deported to Guatemala after visiting an immigration center last month to replace his lost green card. He was there legally, according to his family, who said they have not heard from him since they were initially told that he was dead. So turns up at the immigration office. Oh, I've lost my green card. Need a new one. I've been here since 1987. I escaped Pinochet's Chile. Flee to the US. Been there since 1987, and then loses his green card. Gets arrested. Then they can't find where he is. They don't know where he is. They couldn't find any leads. They were contacting hospitals. They were contacting everything, and then they get a phone call saying, "Oh, we've detained him and he's dead." And then weeks later, he turns up in a Guatemalan hospital. What?
So this guy was Chilean, and he ended up being deported to Guatemala because presumably, well, we're all the same color, and that's close enough. Was that the thinking?
If anybody wants to look up the story, who's listening, his name is Luis Leon, but Luis spelled Luis, Luis Leon. It's a crazy story. Just we've detained your dad. He's now dead. Sorry for your loss. Nope, didn't say that. But then just randomly weeks later, they get a phone call from like a nurse in Guatemala saying your dad's in a hospital bed. Can you help him? And they're like, we've been told he was dead. Like, what the fuck is going on in the background of ICE in terms of what they're actually doing, what we don't know about? It's absolutely insane.
Well, at least we've got a focus being put on them now, which is something that really hasn't happened previously. As much as, we're appalled and horrified by the stories that we're hearing, more and more of them are coming out. And the same can be said of Border Force as well, which is arguably even worse than ICE. So, more of an eye needs to be put on them. With Greg Bovino and he's raided the 1930s dressing up costume box because he was the only guy dressed like that, incidentally, as well. All the other members of ICE were all masked up and, as they always are, to hide their identities, and he's walking down the street with his flaming trench coat on, shouting at people to get out the flaming road as he was going down it, with the haircut as well, the buzz cut. It's a horrifying image. It really is.